Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome today's program, Jason Nurmi, who's Global Strategic Account Manager at Blue Jay Solutions. And today we're going to talk about the value of integrated supply chain technology. Now, the need to have a holistic and integrated view of your supply chain has always been important, but it's arguably even more important than ever today as customer demands around cost and quality and service, just becoming more demanding, than ever before. But, one of the limiting factors or one of the challenges that companies have had historically have been, they've operated in this very fragmented technology landscape, that's kind of been a challenge to achieve, that integrated, technology view. So how do you achieve that? What are some of the, steps that companies ought to take to get there? How do you get started to do that? And ultimately, what's the value proposition? What are the benefits that companies can achieve by having integrated technology, integrated supply chain technology? Well, those are some of the questions we're going to address in today's episode. And it's great to have Jason on the program to, share his insights and perspective on this topic. So Jason, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Adrian. Appreciate the invite to be on today.
So Jason, we've had many of your colleagues from Blue Jay Solutions on the program over the years, and but this is your first time, and like I do with first-time guests, I always like to find out a little bit about their background and how and why they got involved in supply chain logistics to begin with. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your career path and kind of how you got involved in supply chain and logistics and what your current role and responsibilities are there at Blue Jay?
Sure. Well, it seems like eons ago now, but I first got my first start into logistics in the food production management and distribution and warehousing. Acted as a supervisor and production manager in both the discrete line manufacturing as well as into the warehousing. Subsequently went into more of a discrete manufacturing environment as a warehouse manager. And then back in around 97, had an opportunity to get into the technology side of things. And that really kind of launched my supply chain in the technology sector. So it's really culminated my experience in supply chain with technology, which leads to the role I've had at Blue Jay for the last 13 years, has really been in our solutions from various management responsibilities, managing teams and managing customer accounts, as well as now in my current role, really playing sort of an architect between our global solutions product suite and our customers in both the domestic and a global footprint sector, where I'm trying to help our customers find value in exactly this, integrated supply chain solutions.
Great, great experience there. I mean, so you're obviously in the front lines of distribution and logistics and supply chain, and then kind of made the shift over to the technology realm. I always think it's always important. I started my career in new product development and manufacturing, over at Motorola. And I think being on the front lines of any kind of operation, whether it's manufacturing or logistics, just provides a wealth of experience and perspective, particularly then if you move on into other roles, particularly on the technology side, because you've been in their shoes and you kind of have that, a firsthand experience yourself to help inform, the solutions and be able to have those informed conversations with clients. So let's dive into the topic now, and let's start by defining integrated supply chain technology. I mean, are we talking about here, having a single, technology or a single solution that does everything around supply chain management, or about integrating, multiple supply chain applications together, or something different altogether?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the way I would approach that is, from my experience of what I'm seeing is, we're really talking about a combination of technologies, services, and I would say supply chain partners that holistically integrated into an end-to-end solution encompass that, what we call the integrated supply chain, that help customers, approach their entire, I would say their entire microcosm or macrocosm, if you will, these days, of a solution suite.
Yeah, I like that definition because it's much more broader. I mean, I remember back, in the late 90s or early 2000s, a lot of the conversations, I can't tell you how many articles I would see, there was all these commentary around, do you go best of breed or do you go, ERP or single solution, right? Right. And there was so many debates around, BOB or ERP. And I think what most companies have realized is that you really can't get to one single solution that does everything. Number one, because not every single solution does everything, very well. And I think from a supply chain standpoint, obviously, you brought up, thinking about it from in terms of partners as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got partners that have to be part of this whole process, right?
Yeah, exactly. And today, it's to step back on what you talked about with the old ERP solution. I think there was a push in the 90s, late 90s through 2000 and early 2000s that everybody needed to have that backbone ERP system. And that was great, and it stabilized a lot of businesses on the back end. But even those companies now, I think as they've matured and looked at this global solution requirement, they started to look at, how do I pinpoint these best in breed solutions and put them in overlaying on my backbone architecture, but then have the need to integrate from consistency of data to consistency of visibility, and then also to this point we just made, start incorporating those partners, because they're an integral part of that supply chain as well. It's not just the autonomy of I'm doing business myself, it's how do my suppliers impact my velocity, how do my customers impact my distribution network, and how do my trading partners, such as my 3PLs and my carrier base, how do they help me facilitate on an inbound and outbound supply chain?
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. Now, like I said in my opening remarks, I mean, taking an integrated approach to supply chain, management has always, been important, but, it's arguably even more important today. I mean, what are some of the factors that are making this, a priority today?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's a two-pronged approach, right? We really have a globalization of our economy right now, and we're players on a global basis, whether a small domestic company in the U.S. or abroad. And I think a lot of that's been brought about by our buzzword, right? The Amazon effect. But it's true. It's changed the way we need the speed of data, the velocity of data, the adaptability. And with that, it's requiring us to focus on integration of systems, processes, partners. And I think the next step on that, or the next point I'd bring up, and we maybe have a discussion about that in detail, is, it's also this, on the horizon is the blockchain. It's how do we start synchronizing data elements together across our integration of not just our system, but other partner systems to approach this coming down the road in the future.
Yeah, you mentioned blockchain. I think it's arguably, last year in 2017, it's probably one of the biggest buzzwords, or, a lot of, interest in that area. It's funny because when I talk to a lot of, supply chain logistics executives, they're interested in blockchain, but they always joke and say, don't even ask me to explain what blockchain is, because I have no idea. But they kind of have a sense that, it's something that they need to learn more about. And it's certainly something that I know from the technology standpoint, a lot of technology companies are at least keeping a pulse on it and looking into, seeing what value can come from that. So let's talk a little bit about, the approaches, that companies are taking to get to this kind of integrated state. I mean, what are you seeing with the customers that you work with respect to the, getting to an integrated technology? I mean, how are they approaching it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the way they approach it is sort of a result of kind of how they get there. And I think the first thing I would look at is, over the last 5 or 6 years, my experience with my customer base in our TMS world that we've expanded out upon has been a lot of growth and acquisition. A lot of the growth in multiple sectors and multiple verticals has been through the acquisition model. What that's done is it's brought about a need for standardization and rationalization of systems. Second, I think, is what we talked about a little bit before, is that ERP backbone maturity. They're seeing that it's not an one size fits all. We're seeing that with the advent of technology itself, with the new connectivity methods, with cloud and SaaS offerings, you can have best of breed solutions that address specific needs in a vertical or a sector, and have true optimal or cutting edge technology or solutions that you can bridge back into your solution. So I think that's the how did we get there? And then when you ask about the approach, I think what you're seeing is a more holistic approach to their supply chain. We're not looking at it, our customer base isn't looking at it saying, how do I take this solution and put it in to solve that problem? They're looking at it more as a global scale, as an integration system with technology, services, and partners all interplaying as part of that holistic solution. And it also brings about a concept of what we call layering. The approach has been, I don't have to do everything at once, meaning I have to install a WMS, an ERP, a TMS, a new CRM tool. I can take best of class solutions and layer them in a strategic initiative, focusing on the value each one brings for adoption, stabilization, and then you can move on to the next one. So it allows you the flexibility to sequence as well.
So why is this, why hasn't this been done before? Or maybe why was this more, challenging in the past? I mean, I know one reason was, going back to the whole best of breed versus, ERP or single platform discussions of the past. I think one of the arguments against the best of breed approach, if you will, was back in the late 90s, 2000, every single provider had, a proprietary, they built the solution in a proprietary language. So, putting together proprietary systems was very labor intensive. If you had to upgrade, it broke everything apart. I think today, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe you can, kind of talk about this a little bit, because of the more modern architectures and the approaches, the technology available today to, integrate, such as, let's say, web services, XML, that's opened the door, and even cloud services, that's opened the door to make this more of a reality today. Is that right?
Absolutely. When you talk about the cloud services and SaaS, and you talk about where the infrastructure is hosted, the cost to implement is reduced, right? I don't have to maintain that infrastructure. I don't have to maintain the hardware or the team to support that technology. I can focus on the operational aspects of my technology to adopt and adapt into that business process flow. The architecture in itself, you hear the advent of open architecture and mobility and cloud. It provides the connectivity through the middlewares, through the flexibility in formats in which you can take pretty much any native language and make it talk to another language, and then aggregate all of those disparate, if you will, systems into a holistic end-to-end supply chain solution, because you have the advent of another tool called, what we talk about is the new buzzword again is control towers. Aggregated data with control towers for milestone management, workflow management, and dashboard visibility that bring all of those systems together to single point data and visibility.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I've seen, the term control tower has, various parts over the years, it becomes hot, and then kind of people don't talk about it and it becomes hot again. And certainly hot, hot again right now, I think for the many of the reasons that we've already talked about. And it's not just the visibility piece, which I think you just alluded to. There's more to that, right? It's the kind of the orchestrating and the synchronizing, the workflows across, the different processes and different applications that ultimately end up doing some of the execution work, right?
Right, absolutely. It's really opened up. So what does a control tower solve? When I have that data and it's able to be interfaced and connected, we used to have this term which says, well, I need real-time data. Well, what did that mean? The buzzword has been, I need real-time data. Well, it was hard to differentiate between data for analytical purposes and data that could drive strategic adaptation or change before failure, if you will. And I think what these control towers are offering today is true real-time data through the ability to feed real-time data to have predictive assessment of what the impact of disruptions upstream or downstream can bring to your supply chain. And it gives you really a competitive advantage as a player to adapt to those, to change your model, change your sourcing, change your distribution, change your, any aspect of your supply chain to meet that. And I think you become a much better player with some of the large, if you will, the incumbent ERP players that are out there.
Yeah, that's a good point. You brought up kind of, in some ways, predictive capabilities. And I think part of that conversation is, or what's enabling that is, machine learning and artificial intelligence. My predictions for 2018, that's one of the things I talked about where, supply chain visibility was going to get, clearer, more real time and more kind of intelligent and more predictive because of those technologies now being, layered as part of these solutions. And I would think that things like, again, XML, the cloud services, going back to our prior point about how you also need to think about integrating your trading partners, right? Whether they're your suppliers, your customers, your logistics service providers, that's facilitating kind of the ability to connect to trading partners, maintain those connections, share data and information across trading partners in a more effective and scalable manner?
Oh, absolutely. And I think the key instrument of getting that buy-in with those trading partners is, as you do this and you approach this, we have the flexibility to bring them on board much easier now with the technologies. We have the ability to make them a data point or a data flow into our integrated solutions. But what the point to differentiate is, as you do that, build that partnership with them, provide value back to that partner so that their participation in your network and providing you the data gives something in return to them. For example, it helps with their management of their supply chain or their velocity. The data you provide back for being a member of yours is something of value back to them. And I think that's a real key, that the technology is there to provide the integration. It's the partnership that you gain, and that partnership comes from being able to provide something back to them that's useful for them in their business.
Yeah, that's a very important point. The other thing that I see, and I'd be curious your point there regarding trading partners, is the importance now, as part of having that integrated supply chain technology, integrated view. Part of the challenge historically it was kind of the 80-20 rule, right? You were connected to kind of the 20% of suppliers and trading partners that accounted for 80% of your transactions. And that was probably good enough for you can kind of get away with the margin for error was okay in 10, 15, 20 years ago. But relative to the Amazon effect and everything that we talked about earlier, that margin for error is getting smaller and smaller. So now you really need to bring in those 80% of trading partners that perhaps weren't connected, or you weren't kind of sharing information back and forth. I would assume that these new technologies are helping to facilitate bringing in the kind of the long tail of supply chain?
Absolutely. Look, for example, case in point would be, look at mobility. In the day, let's take a carrier, for example, carrier connectivity to help you in your distribution, your network to your customer base, and ensuring customer understands visibility into where their deliveries are. Back, you used to say, well, if I get 20% of my carriers on board, I'll have 80% of my deliveries. But it's this other 20%. With a solution now like mobility, a driver only needs to, or a carrier would only need to download an app onto their phone and be compliant and able to provide data back and forth and be a part of your network. Where before, that technology didn't exist. They had to either hard code integrations back to their dispatch, which would go back through a van, or pushed 3 times a day, or pushed through a telematics. But today, with the advent of this technology, you can extend out to those very small players and include them in part of your integrated supply chain network.
Yeah, no, great example there. I mean, so let's talk about some of the benefits. I mean, what are the main benefits that companies are achieving now, thanks to having an integrated supply chain technology?
Sure. I think, one is leveraging data. When you have an integrated supply chain, and you're talking again about like the control tower, I think the ability to leverage aggregated data, normalized data, and really move away from historical analytics to business intelligence, which is forward-looking and be able to make decisions. That's a key benefit. I think the other benefit is you inherently can adapt a better security model now. I think security is much more enhanced in the networks as well. There's companies that even provide security with single sign-ons and such. So I think there's a benefit of network security as well. The other aspect I think is, companies can actually go out and purchase best of breed point solutions and incorporate those into a holistic vision versus having to settle for, well, I have to accept this package or this module because that's what comes with my broader offering. So that you can have the best in breed and still integrate them. I think lastly is, for those smaller companies that are coming on board in the market today and they're trying to grow through acquisition, it gives them the opportunity to compete with those larger players because you now have the technology and the tools that you can bring your solutions together and have that same analytical visibility and connectivity that really took years and millions of dollars in the past to be at that competitive level.
That last point around the M&A, you've seen that in the past for sure, where companies have, 2 or 3 companies have come together, even just 2 companies have come together, and they say, okay, we have to, rationalize our IT architecture here. So let's go to a single instance of X, right, around the world. and now you're like 5 years in and you're still not fully deployed. And, and that solution might've been great in North America, but it's not so good in Europe or in Asia. Whereas now you're ripping out a solution that was very good in Asia to try to get to the single instance of this one application that might not be good there. So now you've wasted 5 years. You're kind of, putting in a solution that may not be the best fit for various reasons in different parts of the world. Whereas I think what I'm seeing more and more of these days is to say, hey, you know what, if to your point, this might be a best of breed or a best of region or a best in class application for this particular process, for this particular region, for this particular aspect of our supply chain. Let's keep it there. But because we need that integrated view, because we need that integrated way of synchronizing processes, let's layer in some of these control tower technology and other these newer solutions to help orchestrate between the applications.
Right. And then there's layers like you'll have middleware that can normalize data. So to your point, I can take a CRM tool that's good in Asia Pacific and keep one that's more specified for North America. I can keep 2 backbone ERP systems in place, take those data elements, normalize that data through middleware, and then still aggregate it to a control tower and have the same holistic top-down centralized view of my network, but allow that autonomy independently in the regions where it makes more sense.
Right. And I think the other, going back to the point about trading partners, I mean, the reality is you can invest all the time and money that you want to get to one single behemoth solution within your four walls. But the reality is that, a lot of that data, a lot of the information, a lot of the orchestration and synchronization you need to do is with external trading partners. And they're going to have different systems and they're going to have different applications and so forth. So you're never truly going to get to that one app, one solution, right? So I think that's the other, part of that. Well, Jason, we're running short on time here, so I'm just going to go right to my last question here. I mean, what actions should companies take then today to achieve kind of an integrated supply chain technology? I mean, what's the first step?
In my opinion, from the experience that I've done working with our customers over the last years, and you're looking at what it entails to migrate to this model, I think it's really to do a self-evaluation on your agility and your resiliency to adapt to this type of change. When I say agility, it's do you have the flexibility as an organization, both from the operational, the IT, and the social climate, as well as the resilience. This isn't an easy process all the time. It's you might bump up and have to fail, and you'd have to have the resiliency to keep going after it, knowing that the larger prize at the end is the goal. So first, it's really do a self-evaluation of are you ready to undertake this type of change at this velocity? Second, I think is really you have to document your current processes, your gaps, and your requirements. You have to really have a good understanding of where do you have solutions in place that are working and where do you need connectivity or help in your supply chain. And I think finally, this is a key differentiator is you need to seek partners, not just vendors in these technologies. And the way I say that is a vendor is somebody who simply offers you the technology or the connectivity and then allows you to build and grow upon your own. But a true partner, somebody who's going to partner with you, relies upon their industry experience or expertise and helps you to achieve greater at the end. And then not once the implementation or the solution is put in, they continue to help you drive value for your organization as you grow. So I think those are the key. And the last point is, with any architectural structure you look at, keep thinking about that blockchain because it's coming. So anything we're taking the initiative to put in place today, we should look at and understand at least the framework of how is the constructs of blockchain going to impact my integrated supply chain going forward, because we're going to have to adapt to that next.
A lot of great advice and food for thought there, Jason. And, like I always say at the end of all our episodes, we always just manage to scratch the surface on these topics. But I think we hit a lot of, great points. And I think, we're going to continue to see, this trend and this, objective continue to become more and more important in terms of getting to this integrated, state. So again, Jason, thank you for making the time to be with us today.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Adrian. Appreciate the time as well.
Great. Thank you to those of you that joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the Blue Jay Solutions website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for Jason, you can post it there, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you all for joining us and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.